If I were to make one of those talking dog movies, it would be centered around pit bulls going through a breed ban. Canine German shepherds would walk the streets, searching houses to make sure no one's harboring any pits. They'd be bullied by humans and avoided by their dogs. And the first scene with our main pit bull would be him and his human watching the news. The news anchor is going over dog attacks, and he mentions that pit bulls, while only being 13% of the dog population, commit over 50%. Oh, and not just pit bulls, also Rottweilers, because this is my movie and they also feel black to me. Rottweilers are black, and so are pit bulls, who are sometimes Latino. And there would 100% be a scene where a golden retriever uses the N-word, and the pit bulls and Rottweilers have to have an entire discussion with them on why he can't. He gets it. Aww. You know, I thought of that as an example for this video, but now I unironically think that would make a great film. So this video is inspired by me making a post and it ruffling more feathers than intended. This meme, I'll just leave it on screen for a little bit. Now, in their defense, this does seem to be a terrible thing to say. But why? Well, I think that mostly depends on who you are and how you think. If you say black people are nothing like these vicious animals, then that's not what I'm saying. That's what you said. Stick with me. Let me cook. That's one way of reading the statement. The wrong way. I expect much better of you. The alternative way of reading this is a comparison between the way people talk about pit bulls and how they often use argumentation that's curiously reminiscent of the type used to justify anti-black conclusions. You often get a wall of statistics, news reports, personal experiences, etc., etc. From there, you could interpret this as me saying pit bulls, like black people, are highly discriminated against and portrayed in a negative light that doesn't reflect reality for capitalistic gains and social control, which is the way I intended it to be read. Simply put, the meaning of this meme and the thesis of this act of the video at least is that pit bulls have been racialized as black. Ever how, I felt like I couldn't discuss the pit bull connection without also addressing why the comparison between the condition of blackness and that of animals more broadly, and that of dogs in particular, is actually, pardon my French, very fucking warranted. This of course brings implications of humanness into play if you're new here, which as you can see from the runtime and me being on the camera, quickly turned this from essay to dissertation. All those pesky philosophers won't be mentioned till Act 2 though, so if you're more interested in a pit bull discussion, you can refer to timestamps for where each act ends and begins. I sense this video may be one of my most contentious so far, so let's try to start with a grounding statement that'll keep us sorta on track. Without showing too much on my hand, the man who was offended by being mistaken for gay reveals how he feels about, well, the gays. But this video isn't about the gays. Sources and description, let's get started. Part 1, how pit bulls became hated. Michael Vick, former football star, black man, and infamous dog fighter. So in most of the sources I read for this video, Michael Vick was mentioned in some capacity, so I feel it necessary to touch on him a little bit, and the role he's played in canine politics, which is a term I just made up. As I'm sure many of you already know, Michael Vick would gain infamy in the 2000s for being exposed as a dogfight organizer. The details of this are harrowing and I won't rehash them here, but what we will talk about is the media frenzy that came with it. I'm not old enough to remember the OJ trial, but from what I've heard about it, the Vick case seems similar, except someone was actually found guilty, and Vick didn't have the support of the black community, and a person actually died. You know, maybe these things aren't that much alike, but what I'm trying to get at is there were undoubtedly people who were mad at the crime, but there are also people who seem more concerned with who committed the crime. The who became a symbol for the collective other they wish to punish, many such cases. And the news media feeds into this with increasingly agitative and dehumanizing coverage, or empathetic and passive coverage, depending on who you are. Insert Zach Fox tweet here. With that said, it seems that throughout the Michael Vick debacle, there were two important linkings that happened. First, that of black dog ownership with dogfighting, and second, perhaps most crucially, that of the black man and the pit bull. The latter is the key to our discussion here. Anything attached to black men tends to get equated with criminality, because this is America. We see this with the reports on rising crime during the period, which connected attacks by pit bulls to gang violence by super predators. I mean YNs, I mean urban youths. This type of rhetoric swept pit bulls into the war on drugs. Soon they were seen as the carriers of the contagion of criminality, a perception likely reinforced by their proximity within a hip-hop scene. All of these relationships were crystallized with the Michael Vick case. Vick put a face on the crime of dogfighting, a black one. This change coincided with new legal restrictions surrounding pit bulls. Local and state laws prohibiting the ownership of certain dog breeds have become increasingly common. While some residents of these localities have experienced bites from pit bulls, other communities have implemented them as preventative measures that prove to be useless, as we'll get into later. However, it should be mentioned that pit bulls aren't the first most dangerous dog, which should give you an idea to how manufactured this all is. Conveniently, many of the past so-called dangerous dogs often belong to those with the least power. Over the course of history, the dogs often portrayed as dangerous and subjected to the highest penalties have belonged to people with the least political power. For example, in England, King Henry II demanded that all mastiffs kept by commoners be seized and either killed or maimed until they're unable to work. This process was called expedition, and it rendered the dog permanently lame and effectively useless as a working animal. This killed 2 commoner birds with 1 golden stone. It deterred poaching in a royal forest, and it weakened his subjects psychologically. Actually, make it 3 poor birds, because I imagine this also took away their only sense of security and self-defense as well. From the 1860s to the 1890s, it was bloodhounds. From the 1960s to the 1970s, it was German shepherds. And now, it's the pit bull. Despite pit bulls very much existing in these previous periods, they weren't considered dangerous then. Why? Did the proximity to Black and Latino people make the aggression gene just appear in the 80s? Well, no, but some dogs are more popular than others at certain time periods. Like, I could probably see the ownership of golden retrievers increasing after Air Bud dropped. In more simple terms, PR for pit bulls isn't the same for the golden retriever, to say the least. Instead, the pit bull arguably creates what's called a moral panic, as defined by South African sociologist and professor at the London School of Economics, Stanley Cohen. Moral panic is defined as a sudden swell and fundamentally inappropriate hysteria about a novel, obscure, or previously ignored phenomenon that causes members of a society to fear not just for their personal safety, but also for their entire way of life. Cohen believed that moral panics arise during times of increased social tension, when they serve as psychological distractions from much more frustrating and intractable issues like poverty, unemployment, or racial unrest. Sometimes the panic begins as a legitimate concern about a real problem. A good example they provide is the Stranger Danger campaign.
Do you know what to do when approached by strangers?
But the response is removed from effective messaging and measures.
Stranger is a person you do not know. Most strangers are nice, but bad strangers and good strangers look and act the same, so avoid all strangers.
Which is to say, yes, your kid could be nabbed by a stranger, but 9 times out of 10, if something like that happens, it's going to happen from someone you know. So while you should obviously still be sensible when it comes to strangers, it's subjectively more likely, if anything happens, that it won't be a stranger, in terms of trafficking and most CSA-related crimes. Some numbers put the likelihood at over 90%, but that's the first type of moral panic. The other type of moral panic, however, is when the threat is actually non-existent. This is like the Salem witch trials or the satanic panic.
Warning signs of satanic behavior may be apparent, such as a sudden, bitterly antagonistic attitude towards family and religion, a reclusive behavior pattern, and listening exclusively to heavy metal rock music.
Obviously, no witches were ever found, nor were there any confirmed cases of satanic child sacrifice rituals. But if you turned on the news at that time, you were only a sneeze away from landing in a gay, devilish sex orgy. I don't know. Both types of panics allow the good members of a society to unite around a common goal of defeating those people, the bad people. Moral panics often cohere around the wrongdoings of what Cohen called folk devils, or members of a social group who can easily be portrayed first as different, then as deviant. Any group can come under scrutiny as long as its members can be framed as cultural outsiders whose actions pollute and threaten the lives of good, decent people. Religious, ethnic, and political minorities are almost always the easiest targets. Like other forms of motivated reasoning, moral panic is impervious to fact. Violent crime in the US has declined every year since 1993, yet polls indicate that Americans fear crime now more than they ever have. Dozens of case-controlled medical studies have failed to show any causal link between vaccines and autism, yet dedicated anti-vaccine activists continue to insist that there is one. But as we said earlier, there's 2 types of moral panics, one based in somewhat reality and the other based in fantasy. The pit bull panic fits into the first category. Remember when I talked about how pit bulls have different PR than the golden retriever? Well, the pit bull didn't have Lassie or Air Bud. No. Instead, they'd be on the local news for vicious attacks. But that made them more appealing to people who are looking for a more economical solution to home security.
For some, having a pit bull means security.
I would hate to come home and find out my home has been invaded and I had no protection on it. And having a dog of that nature, or like you said, if they see the dog, they ain't coming in.
And Florida was a key player in this, reporting a trend of pit bull attacks in the 80s. This trend was all of 2 incidents, and this may shock you, but there were other dog attacks in the state that were just as serious but didn't receive nearly the same attention. Not only did the public not understand the dog's history or temperaments, most did not even know what they looked like, and yet the town of Hollywood, Florida passed a formal ordinance requiring owners of suspected pit bulls to carry a $25,000 liability insurance. Gradually, these stories took on a single thematic shape. They focused on the sordid history of American dogfighting and the dark, quote, instincts that all pit bull dogs, no matter how far removed from that history, must possess as a result.
It's never been used for anything else except fighting. Pit bull type dogs genetically have impulsive aggression built in.
Never mind that the American Staffordshire Terrier and the Staffordshire Bull Terrier have been bred for dog shows since the middle 1990s, or that several other breeds that have never been subjected to media scrutiny, such as the Boxer, Akita, and one I can't pronounce, were once used for fighting. The media's caricature of the pit bull made it a perfect folk devil. It was publicly associated with violent criminals. It was said to be unpredictable and uncontrollable. It was everywhere, and even better, it was hard to define. Remind you of anything? Canicide, the killing of dogs, has been committed in ways over the last centuries, motivated by a popular fear of rabies or by panic over a specific breed. In 19th century Paris, for example, the overblown fear of rabies led to dog massacres. While the fear of rabies is based on a real disease, fear of pit bulls is predicated on more nebulous factors. The breed of a dog is mostly determined by visual or behavioral characteristics. Categorization based on breeds is an imprecise taxonomical system. Defining a pure breed is about determining what breed a dog resembles. But in the case of the pit bull, its biological or genetic reality is even more questionable, since what is commonly known as a pit bull is not an official breed, but an umbrella term that can refer to various breeds. Like the issue of race in humans, the pit bull exemplifies how much dog and breed have to do with human perception and social construction than with science. And also, like the issue of race, it's used as a method of social control. Let's say I own a dog park and I really hate Japanese immigrants. Let's say in this universe, every Japanese immigrant loves dog parks and has a Shiba Inu. I can't ban Japanese people, but I can ban the Shiba Inu. You see where I'm going? Pit bull legislation is argued to have worked in the same way and has even mirrored the same racial profiling. There's a documented practice of canine profiling in legal cases in which the breed alone would count as evidence that the individual animal is violent. New York City's Democratic mayor, Ed Koch, was one of the first leaders of a large city to decide that pit bulls had to go. Koch had nothing against potentially dangerous dogs per se. He'd previously called for unsupervised German shepherds to patrol the fences of storage yards to harass would-be graffiti artists, saying if he had it his way, he'd replace them with wolves. But on the other side of the tracks, Koch decided that pit bulls were a problem because of who was thought to own them. There are dogs, dangerous dogs, and then there are pit bulls. You see, there's black people, and there's pit bulls were banned as part of the city's health code in 1989. The ban was lifted 2 years later after a series of due process and equal protection challenges. But the New York City Housing Authority passed a number of regulations that made it impossible to keep pit bulls in public housing. After the killer dog media circus of 1987, one incident was all it took to unleash anti-pit bull fury in any city. Miami-Dade County banned pit bulls in 1989 after the press seized a news of a dog attack that badly scarred the face of an 8-year-old girl. In Denver, an attack on the evangelical pastor prompted the city to enact restrictions on pit bull ownership so prohibitive that they may as well have been an all-out ban. One of note being a mandatory $300,000 insurance policy. Editorials in both the Miami Herald and the Rocky Mountain News applauded their local government's attempts to eradicate this, quote, urban menace from communities. Urban menace, just say it. On paper, these laws were a way for the dog to gradually disappear from the cities without having to take drastic measures. Existing owners of pit bulls, or any dog that looked like one for that matter, would be grandfathered in, so long as they retained the requisite insurance and had their dogs sterilized, tattooed, and registered with the city by a given deadline. But if they didn't, their pit would be seized by animal control and destroyed. Also, after the deadline, anyone bringing a pit bull into the city or harboring a pit bull will be subject to legal action, or perhaps a gun to the head, like this one case. One lawyer recounted that several of her clients were forced to pick up their dogs from the municipal shelter in body bags. Denver had made the decision to put down thousands of dogs over these alleged safety concerns. They would come to a person's house, and if they had a pit bull, they would take it away and kill it. And this happened indiscriminately. Whether your dog had a history of aggression, bit anyone, or was the goodest boy of all, it didn't matter. There appears to be racial ends of this in Denver area veterinarian told Rocky Mountain News in 2005. Look at the dogs that have been impounded and the surnames of their owners. They aren't killing dogs from Cherry Creek, which is a wealthy suburb in the Denver area. They pick on the easiest people to pick on, the working poor, the Black and Latino working poor to be precise. Funny how that works. But sure, I'm totally sure this pit bull bias isn't a race thing. Part 2. The Aggression Myth. In The Racialization of Pit Bulls, What Dogs Can Teach Us About Racial Politics, or as I call it, the paper that explains why I'm right, we get more insight into this idea of pit bulls being racialized as black and how this has led to discrimination against the breed. What this paper shows us is that despite dog ownership generally being racist white in the US, most Americans associate pit bulls with black people. Anti-black attitudes in general are a significant independent predictor of both anti-pit views and of preferring other breeds over them. Additionally, stereotypes of black men as violent in particular are significant independent predictors of both anti-pit views and of preferring other breeds over them, and state-level prejudice is a significant negative predictor of enacting legislation to preempt breed-specific bans, which is a confusing way of saying states with more levels of racial prejudice are less likely to enact laws that are meant to protect against unfair breed bans. White Americans' favorability ratings of African Americans were consistent predictors of support for pit bulls in both surveys, and while we don't have exact figures on dog ownership by race, apparently black people are more likely than white people to regularly interact with pit bulls. Black people are also more likely than whites to say pits are their favorite breed. It's hardly a coincidence that the two dog breeds stereotyped as black owned are the two breeds that evoke the most fear from the public. You know how the chances of a black person receiving a call back is lowered if they have a black sounding name, right? Well, this isn't just a thing in the job market. A recently published article on racialized names and time to adoption in a county dog shelter shows that implicit associations with African Americans are particularly powerful for pit bulls. Pit bulls with increasingly black sounding names are adopted significantly lower. Taken together, the results of this article confirm what many keen observers of the pit bull position in American society have long suspected. Pit bull prejudice is at least partly an extension of racial prejudice that's activated by the breed's affiliation with black men and African American culture. To be sure, racialization is far from the only reason why so many people dislike pit bulls, and it may not even be the most important factor. But the results in the article indicate that it's impossible to disentangle pit bull politics from the politics of race. As the gays say, clock it. So maybe you don't think pit bulls are drug dealers, but you've been told they're more aggressive than other breeds. That is in their genetics. This argument isn't supported by much. We've yet to locate an aggressive gene of the type implied when people talk about pit bulls. The big question everyone has when they get involved in this discussion is it true that some breeds are simply more dangerous than others? Or are some breeds just simply dangerous? In short, no, things aren't that simple, but in long. In 2000 and 2001, researchers from the Institute of Animal Welfare and Behavior at the University of Veterinary Medicine, Germany, put 415 dogs from allegedly aggressive breeds that had been banned in Lower Saxony. These included the American Stanford Terrier, Staffordshire Bull Terriers, Rottweilers, Dobermans, and some others. Through behavioral tests that mimicked 21 situations that might occur between dogs and humans, and 14 situations that a dog might experience in its everyday environment, they found that 95% of dogs behaved appropriately during the test. 158 of them displayed no aggression at all, even when threatened. Another 201 of them only escalated their behaviors to a level of barking or backing away. And only 37 of them, 9% to be exact, bit when they felt threatened. And of those, only one did not give some type of warning. To plainly answer the question posed, when these results were compared with a control group of 70 golden retrievers, researchers found no significant difference in the behavior of the two groups. As a result, Lower Saxony lifted its breed ban. But we're in America, we don't listen to scientists. Additionally, a 2011 Canadian study found no significant difference in the behaviors of 40 pit bull type dogs adopted from animal shelters and 42 dogs from other breeds. The only differences they noted were that pit bulls were adopted by younger owners and were more likely to sleep in their owners' beds. But pit bulls have a history of dogfighting, you say. We can't ignore their nature. Pointers point, retrievers retrieve, and pit pit bulls maul, right? No, and I need you to pay attention because it gets super sciencey and technical right here. In order to catch and kill its prey, a hungry dog must proceed through a full sequence of predatory motor patterns. These are orient, eye, stalk, chase, grab and bite, kill and bite, dissect, consume. The behaviors that are considered characteristic in certain breeds are pronounced because humans have taken dogs whose behavior was interrupted at key points in that sequence, selected offspring that exaggerated one or more of those particular traits. Pointers, for example, exaggerate the stalking phase of the sequence. But breeding for behaviors is not like shopping from a catalog. Rather, it is more like pushing a car uphill. The gravity of evolution naturally pulls domestic dogs into one large bell curve. The job of the pedigree breeder is to exert a constant push in the other direction by way of controlled mating and rigorous selection. Dog breeding is a well-established art, but a crude, unestablished science. To demonstrate this, let's use the crazy dog analogy. In this analogy, we're going to assume our goal is to create a crazy dog, a dog that will turn and attack any human being, animal, or living entity relentlessly and never stop until it dies. And it does this 100% of the time. Let's assume we've actually created a dog like this. Okay, stick with me. The minute that dog mates with another dog, half of that genetic material is going to be lost. So that crazy pup is going to be 50% crazy dog. And if that pup grows up and mates with someone, their offspring will be 25% crazy dog, so on and so forth. That means that within only 7 generations, you're down to 1% crazy dog. Mind you, this is assuming we were 100% successful at creating a type of dog that attacks any animal, human, or anything else 100% of the time until it dies for whatever reason we want to create this dog. This analogy assumes we succeed, but most dog breeders don't succeed in creating a dog that, you get the point. When breeders stop pushing the car rolls back downhill, and this behavior drifts back to the middle. Unlike pointing or retrieving, both of which increase a dog's ability to feed itself, fighting isn't one behavior, but a complex series of behaviors that put the animal at tremendous risk. As highly social creatures negotiate and renegotiate their relationships over time, most dogs depend on shared resources for their survival. If removed from human society, a dog that indiscriminately attacks or kills its own kind doesn't live very long. While it's certainly possible to breed for certain types of aggression, it's much harder to breed dogs that match the profile fighters say they want. An animal that is indiscriminately accepting of humans, selectively reactive around other dogs in a specific environment, but tolerant of dogs outside of it. One that doesn't signal its intentions and also doesn't feel fear or pain. They may as well be describing the American Unicorn Terrier, because these are all genetic dead ends. On this doesn't feel pain myth, the pit bull placebo states, because pit bulls have historically been bred to have increased tolerance for pain, it would not be unreasonable to conclude that this would be a factor in severe or fatal dog attacks. There are also some documented cases where pit bulls appeared highly tolerant of pain and focused during an attack. But sweeping statements like this are never based on documented evidence of significant populations. Behaviors such as extreme tolerance to pain can be found in groups of dogs within a population. It is just as easy to find groups of dogs within a pit bull population which have normal or even increased severity to pain. Increased tolerance for pain is an unnatural or artificial trait within a breed, and as such needs to be constantly selected for. Therefore, the number of pit bulls that are extremely tolerant to pain depend largely on the recent breeding practices of humans, which cannot be determined. There are documented cases of pit bulls that were extremely difficult to disengage from attack. There are documented cases of pit bull attacks which were thwarted when a dog was struck with a bat or shovel. There are documented cases of pit bull attacks which ceased when an animal was struck with sticks, curtain rods, or hands. And there are many cases of pit bulls attacking without much conviction, with a dog retreating at the shouts or mere presence of another person. But these situations only demonstrate that there are many variables within any breed. Attacks that resulted in fatality overwhelmingly involved unsupervised children or elderly persons alone with a dog, regardless of their breed. Most dogs do not respond to pain while in a frenzied state of a severe attack. This behavior is observed in many different types of dog breeds. But Again, no researcher has found the aggression gene of the type described when we talk about pit bulls. What people call aggression in dogs is often more accurately described as anxiety or fear. And the idea that pit bulls' involvement with dogfighting has led to them being more aggressive today is scientifically bunk. It's like they think every pit bull is secretly used in dogfighting, or isn't that far removed from it. You see this being and you project your negative assumptions onto it based solely on its appearance. What does that remind you of? Quickly, a number of other studies have confirmed that dogs lash out most frequently from fear and anxiety, not rage. Not every dog that displays these behaviors has been abused, neglected, or formally trained, but overwhelmingly, factors most highly correlated with dog aggression, such as a dog's early development, its level of socialization with people and other dogs, how it's contained, and which training methods the owner uses, are completely within the owner's control. Research indicates that these factors are far more important than the physical shape of a dog in determining its behavior. And the behaviors, when they appear, are often sensationalized by the media. Speaking of sensationalization, what better place to start with the biggest one of all? The website that is a hub for all this anti-pit bull nonsense. Dogsbite.org. Dogsbite.org is a website many of the anti-pit bull crowd use to support their arguments. But unfortunately, the data on dogsbite.org is about as reliable as a tweet from our president. Dogsbite.org was created by a web designer named Colleen Lynn. Lynn previously ran a fortune-telling website named DivineLady.com, on which she referred to herself as Divine Lady, Beholder of the Soul. But in 2007, Lynn was bitten on her arm twice by unaltered male pit bulls while jogging through a Seattle neighborhood. The dog that bit Lynn was actually euthanized, and Lynn received a sizable payout from the owner's insurance company. Most people would probably stop there and go on about their day, but not Colleen. A pit bull attacked her, and she decided that all pit bulls must pay, going on to dedicate her life to the promotion of breed-specific bans. Lynn has no professional credentials in statistics, epidemiology, or animal behavior, and neither do the sources she relies on most frequently. For one, the website contradicts everything put forth by the groups most qualified to speak about animal science, animal behavior, you can read, I can't. The American Veterinary Medical Association, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the American College of Veterinary Behaviors, the Animal Behavior Society, the National Animal Care and Control Association, the Association of Professional Dog Trainers, and just about almost every other animal welfare organization in the country that is not PETA. According to the website, these aforementioned groups have been co-opted by the Pit Bull Lobby, which supporters of the website say is financed by dog fighters. The site is also littered with childish ad hominems like pit nutter, insult for pit bull owners, and science whore. Worse, commenters are allowed to express violent fantasies about killing the dogs. It features photographs of pit bulls that have been shot or stabbed under headings such as "fuck pit bulls" and "the who own them." Why, never. Let's focus on this science whore insult though. They use this term to insult veterinarians and behaviorists who tell them that there is no scientific basis for these breed ban laws. They are insulting and lambasting the veterinarians and the behaviorists who are among the most qualified to speak on the subject. The experts are being lambasted. What does that remind you of? Quickly, time's up. It's science denial. In my dissertation on madness, we learned a trace of a science denier. They're described in Lee McIntyre's How to Talk to a Science Denier. Those of you who haven't seen that video, science deniers make some of the same common mistakes that get themselves away, which we can see demonstrated all over this website and also from anyone who was bought into this anti-pit bull nonsense. Science denial relies on conspiracy theories, see the pit bull lobby, cherry-picking evidence, reliance on fake experts, setting impossible expectations for science, and using illogical reasoning. On that trait of relying on fake experts, most of the information on the website comes from one self-published paper on dog attack deaths and maimings by a man named Merritt Clifton. He was the former editor of the Animal People newsletter and now runs an animal rights blog called Animal 24/7 and claims to have been bitten by a pit bull in 1982. Since Clifton's paper has been cited both in mainstream press and in several court cases as evidence of the rationale for the basis of breed bans, a thorough examination of it is necessary. Just like Lynn, Clifton possesses no relevant credentials. His supporters call him an award-winning journalist, but he readily admits that his research methods are limited to scanning media reports and classified ads rather than speaking with investigators or reviewing primary source documents. According to Dr. Roy Coker, a physics professor at the University of Texas at Austin, who has taken great pains to outline differences between empirical political science and pseudoscience. The hallmark of pseudoscience is their tendency to clip news reports, collect hearsay, cite other pseudoscience books, rather than making an independent investigation to check their sources. Additionally, pseudoscience always avoids putting its claim to meaningful tests, especially a peer review. They are also fond of imaginary conspiracies, as we spoke about earlier. Clifton's dog attack report fills almost every criteria on Coker's list and the attributes described by McIntyre in How to Talk to a Science Denier. The emphasis is not on meaningful, controlled, repeatable scientific experiments, but it is on unverifiable eyewitness testimony, stories and tall tales, hearsay, rumor, and dubious anecdotes. Genuine scientific literature is either ignored or misinterpreted, and anyone who presents it is a science whore apparently. Clifton's paper, which has been used as a main source for this website and in court documents to justify these stupid breed ban laws, has never been peer reviewed, and it contains no citations, so you can't even verify the information. It doesn't draw on government sources, public health codes, or expert opinion. Then there's a problem of its data, which is full of cherry picking. Clifton's paper purports to cover both the US and Canada, but at the time of the author's writing, it only contained about 3,500 human victims over a 30-year period, which is odd because the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality estimates that about 9,500 Americans are hospitalized overnight for dog bite injuries each year. If his paper is to be believed, Clifton has only captured 2% of serious American dog bite injuries, and it gets even smaller if you add in the Canadian data. And it doesn't even stop there. He defines dog attack deaths as deaths in which the dogs were only tangentially related, such as victims who ran from dogs and were hit by a car. Numerous deaths on Clifton's list are contradicted by official medical examiner reports, such as these disfiguring injuries. The American Society of Plastic Surgeons reported that in just 3 years, 2011, 2012, and 2013, more than 84,000 Americans received reconstructive surgeries for dog bites. However, that number reflects a 40% drop from 2000, even though the dog population has actually increased. He also included breeds of dogs that don't exist, such as an East Highland Terrier. So this guy made a bunch of false claims, and the author of the book decided they wanted to interview him. Clifton not only denied their interview request, but said that they are not a journalist and are an advocate, and also called them a pit bull Holocaust denier. Wouldn't that go towards the people spreading misinfo about pit? I don't know. Oh yeah, and he also made fun of them for having a dead dad. All around great guy. These are science deniers. The final trait of science denial is illogical reasoning. We can see this in the pushing of these breed ban laws. Maybe I'd be a little less critical if these laws actually did what they claim to do, but they don't. Not even a little. But that raises the question, what would a breed ban law have to do to actually be effective, you know? Well, in 2010, doctors Gary Petronek and Amy Martyr used a theoretical model from public health called Number Needed to Treat to explore how many dogs would need to be eliminated in order to prevent a single dog bite-related emergency room visit or hospitalization. They called this the number needed to ban. The figures they came up with were startling. In Colorado, over 8,000 dogs would have to be banned, most of which would likely be destroyed, in order to prevent a single injurious bite, and the number dramatically increases with the severity of the injuries. Using national data from the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, they calculated the number needed to ban at over 30,000 dogs. Using data from the American Society of Plastic Surgeons to prevent a single reconstructive procedure each year, they calculated the number needed to ban would be over 30,000 dogs. Again, dogs to be removed from their homes and most likely euthanized. That would be the equivalent of wiping out the entire human population of Long Branch, New Jersey, to prevent one nasty but non-fatal stabbing. The majority of pit bulls, and dogs for that matter, live as pets. Not workers, you see. Pets. Siberian Huskies are no longer pulling sleds. They're living in a home with the most annoying person you know. The overwhelming majority of pit bulls in the US cannot trace their lineage directly back to game breed fighting dogs. Unfortunately, most pit bulls are not used for fighting but live to varying degrees in social environments where signals of fear, aggression, excitement, contentment, and friendliness are sent and received on a daily basis. Because humans attached to these dogs cannot or care not to read these signals does not mean they do not exist. Contrary to what the media and most owners of attacking dogs would have you believe, severe and fatal attacks by pit bulls are usually the end result of an escalation of a series of obvious aggressive behaviors. It is more within the nature of humans to lie about the events that point to their culpability than it is within the nature of dogs to attack unprovoked. So we find owners less than truthful about prior incidents of aggression or improper treatment of their dogs when they are facing legal or civil action after their dog has severely or fatally injured someone. No owner is going to admit a pit bull attacked a child because it was kept on a heavy logging chain for 5 years, bred 2 times a year, was worm infested and parasite ridden, and was teased by children and lived a miserable life. The owner is going to tell the police that the dog never showed any signs of aggressiveness. Another reason why statements about dog attacks being unprovoked are unreliable is because rarely do they take into account the familiar aspect that is so important from the dog's perspective. What may be a provocation for one dog would not be a provocation to another dog, depending on the relationship between the dog and a person, no matter the breed. To address fatal attacks as a pit bull specific problem invalidates the hundreds of deaths caused by other dogs. This approach renders any lessons we may have learned from all non-pit bull attacks useless or of no intrinsic value in the understanding of canine aggression. There are lessons to be learned from all fatal attacks, lessons which can be gleaned from examining all available data, not just the cases which involve a single breed. I highly encourage you to check out the full text of this. There's a bunch of great data analysis and debunking of all these pit bull myths that I didn't get into. My friends, you are more likely to die in a car accident than to a pit bull. You are more likely to die in a Tesla than to a pit bull. At least a pit bull won't trap you when your home while it's on fire. And that is about all I have on pit bulls. Now I want to Act 2, where I make use of my minor in philosophy. There's once this dude who thought orangutans didn't talk so they could avoid being put into labor. I don't know who it was or how it relates to today's discussion, but this felt like the right place to share. Shout out to Alexandra the Average on Instagram, who has dedicated way more time to the subject of the pit bull discourse than I have. If somehow Act 1 wasn't enough for you and you're still not convinced about the pit bull discourse, I highly recommend their page. Like, the pit bull discourse is truly their bag. This act, however, deals with the philosophy, which is my bag. For this act, we'll mainly be reading from AfroDog and the Dreaded Comparison. So a take I see a lot in discussions of the treatment of pit bulls and animals in general, highkey, is something along the lines of they're not human, so who cares? It's usually softened a bit more than that, but that's the general vibe. I think we can agree. What is a human anyway? I'm kidding, but also not. Stick with me. If you've been here a while, you know humans tend to define themselves through negations. That is, to define itself against a subject or subjects. The animal is obviously one of these subjects, but with that comes the notion that some people are actually more animal-like and therefore more akin to savages rather than humans, who need a reason forcibly brought to their land. Blackness is also fit into this space of barely human, therefore more animal and requiring domination by the true humans who possess true humanity, true reason. Blackness understood to possess neither. As we know from my last dissertation, the black is the animal man according to Heidegger. Part of ignoring the obvious fact that some humans aren't given these human rights, which are supposedly promised to all humans, is insisting that a group is actually not human. So in comes the need for standards of humanity, of which humans possess and non-human others do not. Rules, customs, attributes, etc., that supposedly separate the human from the other. Of these attributes, the one most commonly asserted to be only possessed by humans is the ability to reason. But as utilitarian philosopher Jeremy Bentham argues, the newborn or the mentally challenged individual may show very little, if any, trace of reasoning, and yet no one would ever question that they are human. Additionally, Perry Phillips states in his essay, 10 Common Arguments Against Animal Rights Refuted, although animals are unable to do algebra, they are able to make rational decisions regarding their own interests. Dogs, for example, will never be so irrational as to intentionally inhale smoke. They must be forced to do this by contemporary researchers. Oop, clock it. Reason has been entangled from those very Enlightenment roots with misogynists, colonialists, ableists, anti-black, and other pernicious ideologies. The fact is that female people, indigenous people, colonized people, neurodivergent people, and black people have been violently excluded from the ephetus of Enlightenment reason, with reasonable doctrines justifying those exclusions. But here's a thought. Maybe a being doesn't need to demonstrate reason, however defined, to have, I don't know, rights, the freedom to not be colonized and enslaved. Is this take too hot to handle? For what does someone's ability to speak French, drive a car, see in the dark, do algebraic equations, etc. have to do with whether or not it is acceptable or just to enslave, torture, or in some way inflict cruelty upon them? The only relevant requirement, which should be necessary to keep us from inflicting unnecessary pain and suffering, is that individual's ability to feel pain and to suffer. The only qualification individuals should need to make it wrong for us to dominate their lives is that they possess life, that they are alive. For these issues, All else is morally irrelevant. Beautiful. But PhilosyNoir, why are you comparing black people to animals? Isn't that a bit anti-black? Are you saying animals are the new black? Well, no to all those things. The comparison is not in a derogatory sense, obviously. It's of their treatment and the language used to describe both. Let me be Obama. Oppression isn't uniform. Each one has its own flavor. That is to say, no, I'm not arguing that animals or pit bulls are the new black. There can be no new black because the original black is still very much here. What we can do is point out these similarities and address what they really say about humanity, which we can do while also keeping in mind the differences. One difference being the types of responses each group is capable of. Slave rebellions, for example, demonstrate a level of organization that animals don't seem capable of. As divergent the cruelties and the supporting systems of oppression may be, there are commonalities between them. They share the same basic essence. They are built around the same basic relationship, that between the oppressor and the oppressed. So even though we may think of the experiences of black people in this country as being unique, which they were and are, there are many disturbing similarities between their treatment at the hands of white people in the United States and the treatment of animals at the hands of the largest sector of the American population. Indeed, just as humans are oppressed the world over, animals receive poor treatment in nearly every human culture on Earth. Further, any oppression helps to prop up other forms of oppression. This is why it is vital to link oppression in our minds, to look for their common shared aspects and fight against them as one, rather than prioritizing victim suffering. For when we prioritize, we're in effect becoming one with the oppressor. We're deciding that one individual or group is more important than the other, which often leads to infighting amongst the oppressed or defenders of the oppressed, doing very little to upset the very foundations of cruelty. And now for the bar of the day. Comparing the suffering of animals to that of black people or any other oppressed group is offensive only to the species who has embraced false notions of what animals are like. I like that. Let's read that again. Comparing the suffering of animals to that of black people or any oppressed group is offensive only to the species, one who has embraced the false notions of what animals are like. Notions that often apply to humans as well. Remember when I said humans make rules, customs, attributes, etc. to define themselves against the other? While reason is the most commonly asserted to be the difference between true humans and animals, barbarians, savages, or any other degrading European term, AfroDog argues that cannibalism is a more subtle one. That is to say, humans have a no eating each other rule, allegedly, and the humans that do are savages and barbarians that are akin to animals. This alleged savagery was one of the justifications for mass extermination of indigenous people. Apparently, this claim of native cannibalism came from a misunderstanding / mistranslation of the word Carib, which led Columbus to believe the indigenous were cannibals, not Caribs. And like always, these assertions tend to be a lot more projection than anything. Let the record show there is no evidence of indigenous cannibalism. The same can be said for the Europeans. And would you believe dogs have a role to play in this? Well, you should. Dog is in the title, that's pretty obvious. The Haitian Revolution brings a fantasy of edibility and blackness to its literal manifestation. In 1801, Napoleon Bonaparte sent an expedition to the French colony, led by Captain General Alert, to crush the Saint-Louverture's control over the island. Why? Because they hated seeing free black people, that's why. The little French devil couldn't take his L from Toussaint Louverture. Louverture led the Haitian Revolution, which led to the abolition of slavery in Haiti. And then 20 years later, France came back asking for reparations for their slave masters and bled Haiti dry for over a century under the guise of them repaying debt, the debt of them freeing themselves from slavery. Anywho, a bit after this revolution, Louverture drafted an autonomous constitution and sent it to Napoleon, which caused the aforementioned military expedition to be sent with the goal of reinstating French authority. They not only failed, but also suffered heavy casualties. Many to battle, of course, but a lot to the yellow fever, which took General Alert's life as well. But before dying, the general had the idea of sending bloodhounds to Cuba, intending to use them as a way to track the black rebels in the area. But his successor, General Frenchman, eventually thought they could also serve the purpose of attacking and eating them. According to historian Philippe R. Gerard, dogs were allegedly fed with black flesh during the mission. Gerard mentions one French general who remembers that written orders asked that dogs should be fed half a Negro a day. But wait, there's more. As a result of losing ground against the rebels, they also lost their food supply. So they would proceed to eat those bloodhounds that had been used previously to eat black people. So yeah, cannibalism with more steps. The dog bite, or being bitten, reminds humans of our own edibility, which we disavow as a rule. Humans eat animals, but do not let other animals eat them, including the human animal. However, the dog bite, a somewhat mundane occurrence in our society, is a constant reminder that the human being is also an animal that can be eaten. The bite brings into mind the fetishistic nature of human non-edibility. It shows that human consciousness is based on a disavowal of being an edible animal. The dog, in this sense, is essential to the process of dehumanization, since it is the only animal that dares bite humans on a regular basis, thereby constantly confirming the fragile nature of the human condition. The fact that the dog bite not only dehumanizes, but also, and more importantly, commodifies the human by making her fit for animal consumption is all the more poignant in racial context. In such a context, species dominates race, making blackness an indicator of species rather than a racial marker. The white fantasy of cannibalism is a mental strategy that demotes the black race to the level of animal species, thus banning the so-called black race from human taxonomy. The dog bite, when orchestrated by a white against the black, is a racially driven kind of cannibalism that uses fangs as a means of transference. And in that transference, the canine becomes what has been referred to as a white dog. In 1982, American film director Sam Fuller made a cinematic adaptation of Romain Gary's novel White Dog. Fuller's movie of the same name features gory scenes of an immaculate white dog drenched in the blood of black people, unfortunate enough to cross his path. The summer of 1982 was a sensitive time for White Dog, and its release reignited the still fresh collective trauma of the Atlanta murders. At the same time, people feared that White Dog would inspire the KKK, then very much alive, and the film also revived a recent, controversial, and very public use of police dogs against black protesters in Birmingham, Alabama. In sum, White Dog was a graphic materialization of what American consciousness was not yet ready to face, namely, a deeply ingrained history of canine violence against its black population. We don't see their presence at less colorful demonstrations like Occupy Wall Street. They seem to be reserved for black protesters. The Department of Justice 2015 investigation of the Ferguson Police Department uncovered a correlation between race and the repressive use of police dogs in the city of Ferguson. As the report stated, the department's own records demonstrate that, as with other types of force, canine officers use dogs out of proportion to the threat posed by the people they encounter, leaving serious puncture wounds to non-violent offenders, some of them children. Furthermore, in every canine bite incident for which the racial information is available, the subject was African American. Let me say that again. Furthermore, in every canine bite incident for which the racial information is available, the subject was African American. White dogs are not only pets but also extensions of the police state. Indeed, the very flesh and bone entities through which the murderous whims of the police state are made manifest in the everyday lives of those who are property themselves, or else descendants of property, those who own nothing, and as such exists as a threat to the logic of private property altogether. Ooh, I love this part. Do you know who this guy is? Of course you don't. If you do, keep it to yourself. This is my goddamn video. This is Justice Henry Brown, and he ruled in Centel versus New Orleans that dogs by default represent a threat to public safety and are therefore liable to destruction by the police power of the state when they are not properly restrained. In Centel versus New Orleans, Centel sought compensation for the loss of property after an electric car killed his pregnant dog that, standing on the tracks, could not move fast enough to avoid the approaching car. When the case reached the Supreme Court, Justice Brown ruled against Centel, stating that in Louisiana, dogs are conditional property, meaning that the dog must be registered and wear a collar to be legally considered personal property, and Centel's dog was obviously not registered. But more importantly, Justice Brown argued that property in dogs is an imperfect or qualified nature, and that they stand, as it were, between animals for a nature, in which, until killed or subdued, there is no property. Because they are more or less subject to the attacks of hydrophobic madness, Justice Brown posits dogs are unreliable and must be monitored and restrained. Justice Brown explains at length the nature of property in relation to dogs. The property of the dog is conditional in Louisiana. If the dog does not fulfill specific conditions, the animal can be destroyed by the state if deemed a risk to society. And if the dog were to be considered personal property, Justice Brown argues that the police have a right to destroy the animal if they see fit. For Justice Brown, there is no place for the dog on the loose since the dog is, by nature, a loose cannon. Dogs can only be seen as imperfect property. The dog is unpredictable and never fully under human control, and therefore liable to be destroyed. And that is the only important historical fact about him ever. Oh, and he also decided Plessy versus Ferguson. While Afro-pessimism states blackness has no analog, it seems there may be a contender in the animal. Staying clear of analogizing the black condition is something that Wooderson successfully accomplishes, except when it comes to the animal. Wooderson uses cows as an analogy, in a paper written in response to Antonio Gramsci's prison notebooks. But we must still ask, what about the cows? And in the dreaded comparison, we see some of the very clear similarities that Wooderson is getting at. A dairy cow is expected to produce a certain number of pounds of milk per year. As she grows older or suffers from an illness and becomes less productive, she ceases to make a large profit for her owner, and eventually, despite her years of service, is killed and sold. She is killed when her milk output drops below a certain point of profitability. If at some point during her life she outdoes herself by producing more than the expected amount, this is not a standard for which she will be judged thereafter. Whoa, that relationship doesn't sound familiar at all. Returning to Wooderson's response to Gramsci, but we must still ask, what about the cows? First, how would cows fare under a dictatorship of the proletariat? Would cows experience freedom at the mere knowledge that they are no longer being slaughtered in an economy for exchange predicated on exploitation? In other words, would it feel more like freedom to be slaughtered by a workers' collective where there was no exploitation, as opposed to being slaughtered in the exploitive context of that dreary old 9 to 5? The cows bring us face to face with the limitations of Gramscian formulation of the question, what does it mean to be free? As Wooderson argues, the chief difference today, compared to several hundred years ago, is that today our bodies are desired, accumulated, and warehoused, like the cows. Today, at the end of the 20th century, we are still not meant to be workers. We are meant to be warehoused and die. Wooderson reclaims the analogy for the exclusive use of the black condition. In doing so, Wooderson recalls the elliptical nature of the animal presence in the black narrative. The black condition is without analog, except for the animal. This is mentioned not even like 10 pages into the book, I think, and I have to say, reading that after seeing how pissy people got at my comparison was so validating. It's like having a thought and then reading later that someone way smarter than you had that thought also. I love that feeling. Don't you love that feeling? Some motherfucker under the post said, oh, I expect better from a creator called PhilosyNoir. You dare doubt my pen? And another one was like, they are not people or they are not human or some bullshit. My dear viewer, if your argument centers around it not being that deep because they are not people, I fear you have forgotten where you are. To wrap this all up in a neat little bow, there is a subtle connection to be made between the sight of a roaming animal and the phobia of the proliferation of that which is uncontained, previously owned, or meant to be owned. The best example of this phenomena occurs in Detroit, a city where black people and stray dogs are presented as abandoned, on the loose, and roaming the streets. Detroit is a quintessential space for addressing the nexus between blacks and dogs as two previously owned entities. Detroit, a city with numerous abandoned homes, is particularly prone to the proliferation of stray dogs. After a third of Detroiters were forced to leave the city under bankruptcy and abandon their homes, dogs were left behind to fend for themselves. Stray dogs thrive particularly well in areas that are unpopulated yet proximal to human trash. Because of its stray dog population, Detroit has been depicted in the media as a post-apocalyptic canine city with packs of stray dogs prowling through the neighborhoods. Despite the undeniable threat that a pack of stray dogs represent to the human population in terms of health and safety, the extent of the problem with stray dogs in Detroit has been blown out of proportion and sensationalized in the media. A 2012 piece in the Rolling Stone and a 2013 piece in Bloomberg inflated the number of stray dogs in Detroit to 50,000, while the World Animal Awareness Society has put the number closer to 3,000. Given that Detroit is a predominantly black city, the emphasis on a fierce dog on a prowl subliminally connects with the image of the unchained black in a post-slavery era, making both the black and the animal appear dangerously on the loose and eerily alike in their unbridled existence. Cento versus New Orleans returns to haunt a society in which it has become routine for the police power to state to destroy with impunity the black stray regarded as a public threat. With the phenomenon of mass incarceration of black bodies, which some argue constitutes a modern form of slavery, the police power of the state performs a ritual reclamation of its lost property, wherein the unchained black man who has been walking too freely in the streets of America is subdued and killed. There's plenty more in here worth your attention, so I'll just end this with a request for you to check out the full text. I mean, I prefer you check out all the sources I mentioned in my videos, but this one's really up there with Afro-pessimism and A Penetrated Male in terms of favorite reads so far. Anywho, that's all I have for today. Do all that good stuff with the buttons. Please give me your money through Patreon, Substack, or Ko-Fi, and never doubt my pen.